He entered the former slave quarters and vanished from view. All that was left was his bloody hat. But behind those walls, what did Elias Boone see? For what reason was the building initially sealed? And why do blue-eyed individuals continue to disappear around Ash Grove Plantation? It's more than a ghost story. It serves as a warning. Ready to investigate the Stone Eye? Subscribe to the channel right away if you want to follow true stories that transcend time and uncover secrets. To ensure you don't miss any of our investigations, set on alerts. The hot air hovering low over the expansive fields of the Ash Grove. Plantation in rural Georgia, circa the 1850s, creates a thick stillness in the searing heat of late summer. Elias Boone, tall, slender, and gaunt, although with piercing blue eyes that seem to flare with a secret fire, appears there between the rustling cotton stalks. Not only is his steely gaze unsettling, but it also carries the weight of innumerable years of conflict, lost collateral souls, and secrets that are too deeply buried to ever rest. He just got here. The plantation owner, whose finances have dried up like drought-stricken crops, summoned him. Boone contributes a track record. A strict disciplinarian and former lieutenant, he was said to harbor an odd darkness within himself. The slaves exchange looks, but do not meet his gaze, whispering to one another. There are many who claim to have witnessed him standing at the edge of the slave quarters at night, whispering into the darkness as if responding to an echo that no one else could hear. At daybreak, a movement flicker. Boone emerges from the large house's shadows and moves toward the ancient stone cabin where the overseer used to reside. There is a jar on the door. Shafts of light dance across time-scarred walls behind it. He enters without saying anything. Rather, he stops at the doorway, his head cocked as if he's listening for something that's not audible. In the dim light, his blue eyes dart about the room. As he enters, the temperature drops, and the air heavy with the stale smell of past, terror and imprisonment. By midday, there are quiet whispers among the employees. He is chained. In his sleep, he walks. They talk of hushed voices chanting from places they dare not identify, of footsteps heard in the night, and of low, rumbling sounds coming from deep beneath the floors. An old woman remembers how the cabin had been shut with rough boards following, the uprising years prior serving as a warning to anyone who may open it. She shudders. She says, "Something wasn't put to rest," in a shaky voice. Even the owner comments on Boone's strange choices, saying that he prefers the cold and the shadows and sleeps in the barn rather than the small cabin that was set up for him near the main house. Late last night, he was spotted carrying a lantern across the yard toward the sealed structure of the slave quarters, not to check on the fields, but to stand in front of those barred windows and mutter words that no one can understand. The slave. Quarters at Ash Grove Plantation were not built like the others. They were made of thick, dark stone, and their foundations were older than the plantation itself. By sunset, Boone is nowhere to be seen. Only the tip of his lantern's glow is left, lingering near those old stones. A wind picks up, stirring whispers among the dying cotton. His eyes, the only trace left behind, seem to linger in the fading light, watching. Always watching. The locals talked about it as though it was older than the soil it was built on, and they had no idea who had built it or why it had carvings that had faded over time, symbols that no one could identify, etched into the doorposts and lintels like warnings forgotten. Following the 1833 uprising, the building was boarded up, not just nailed shut, but sealed, bolted with iron braces, wrapped in chains, and anointed with oil and soot by trembling hands. They claimed that the interior was blackened by fire, and that the floor was still sticky with blood even after the massacre had been cleaned. In the years that followed, Ash Grove's fortunes declined, crops failed inexplicably, the master's children died young, animals were born deformed, and a number of overseers came and went, each refusing to stay more than a few months. Almost 24 men, women, and children perished in that one night. But what troubled the survivors the most was what was left inside. a hollow, ringing silence broken only by the occasional thump that echoed without origin long after the last body was removed. A worker's leg broke. A fire consumed the tool shed the following day. A man disappeared after stepping over the threshold, though no one acknowledged witnessing him enter, and the sealed stone building loomed at the edge of the property, silent, brooding, and untouchable. Elias Boone started to circle this building in the evenings, initially just standing close to it with his head bowed, before he spoke little to anyone. But his journal, later discovered hidden beneath loose floorboards in the barn, describes vivid dreams in which he described being led down stone steps that were covered in mutterings, prayers, or invocations. Eventually, he started to touch the stones, running his fingers along the carvings as if attempting to feel something beneath the surface. One night, he brought a small object wrapped in cloth and buried it at the foot of the doorway, saying nothing, and the following morning a dead crow was discovered on the roof, its eyes missing. Shouldn't exist. Of voices and tongues he didn't recognize calling him by name. Of a woman with skin like smoke watching him from behind the walls, and he started to refer to the sealed building as a presence rather than a place, writing that she wasn't sleeping, but was simply waiting for the right key. One night, Boone went to the plantation owner and asked that the chains be taken off, but he gave no explanation, just stared with those pale eyes that made everyone who saw them uneasy, and his request was turned down. It was September 13th, 1856, a date that would come to bear the weight of myth for those who remained at Ashgrove. The morning started like any other, with thick fog curling over the fields, cicadas droning in the distance, and the sun struggling to pierce through the gray. Boone did not press the issue, but 2 nights later the chains were discovered lying on the ground, unlocked, untouched by any known hand. The doors were jarred, with the nails scattered as though pushed outward from within. With a lantern in one hand and something glinting in the other, Elias Boone was spotted strolling around the edge of the sealed slave quarters early that morning. He didn't eat or talk to anyone, and by midday he had vanished. No one saw him enter the stone quarters, and no witnesses were present. But later that afternoon, a worker walking by noticed the heavy wooden door. Iron sealed, there was ajar once more, as it had been days earlier, but this time the door creaked open wider, swaying in the wind like a beckoning sign, and inside there was only darkness. Word got out fast, and the plantation owner gathered the remaining hands and told 2 of them to go inside, but they refused, even armed, even threatened, refusing to cross that threshold. Fear emanated from the building like heat, invisible but unavoidable. The overseer himself, a younger man named Grover, who had just arrived and was not aware of the stories, stepped forward with a rifle in hand. A few minutes later he came, out pale and trembling, unable to speak, and he carried Boone's hat in his trembling hands. It was crushed, covered in blood, and torn at the rim, as if it had been violently wrenched from the head it had once crowned. Grover said there was nothing else inside. No footprints, no body, just the hat lying in the very center of the stone floor, surrounded by a spiral of dried leaves. But something was strange. The smell, they said, was not of the temperature inside. The stone quarters was much colder than it should have been. Cold enough to see breath, cold enough to freeze the sweat on one's back, and cold enough to prevent memories from forming properly. Grover could not remember how long he was inside, nor how he had found the hat so easily in that darkness. The plantation owner ordered the structure sealed again, this time with crosses carved into the stones. Death, but of soil. Wet, ancient soil, like the earth from a freshly opened grave. No one thought Boone would be found whole, if at all. That night, strange things were seen in the fields. The dogs refused to go near the stone quarters. Children woke up screaming, saying they heard footsteps pacing just outside the windows. One woman swore she saw a figure in the corn, not walking, but floating, its arms slack, its head cocked at an angle. Ash was spread along the threshold. Christian, African, and even a few in broken Spanish prayers were muttered. The following morning, the ground surrounding the stone building was blackened. The grass was dead. Insects were lying in brittle piles with their legs curled inward. Birds avoided the area in perfect arcs, as if the air itself rejected life, and only the wind continued to move freely, whispering through the trees like a voice barely audible. Elias Boone was declared. After that, Ashgrove fell into decline, the fields were left to rot, the main house was abandoned, and the stone building at the edge of the property remained, door sealed, chains rusting slowly in the Georgia sun. No funeral was held, no grave was dug, and only the hat remained, kept locked in a trunk by the owner, who would disappear during a trip to Savannah less than a year later, leaving behind an empty carriage, 2 startled horses, and a single leather glove lying in the road. Ashgrove Plantation was eventually sold for pennies to a distant cousin of the original owner, a man who never set foot on the land. But some people claim that on moonless nights, a dim light flickers through the cracks in the stone, and that behind it, eyes go pale watching. The structures remained, slowly engulfed by kudzu and neglect, but the stone building, the slave quarters that had long since ceased to serve any practical purpose, persisted like a scar in the landscape no matter how many times. By the early 20th century, it had become folklore, with locals calling it the Stone Eye, children daring each other to touch the outer walls, elders warning against even mentioning its name after dark, and no one really knowing why. They remembered whispers, the blue-eyed man who disappeared, and the curse. A traveling preacher with ice-blue irises collapsed during a sermon, choking on dust. A young woman from upstate D's went missing near the old plantation ruins. Her photograph was later found lodged between the stones of the sealed building, her eyes scratched out. A boy with pale eyes drowned in a shallow creek with no current. A traveling preacher with ice-blue irises became shorthand for strange misfortunes in the area. In 1934, a team of anthropologists from a northern university arrived to study postbellum architecture in Georgia. Among them was Dr. Lucian Harlow, who was particularly interested in the stone building because of its unusual construction, alignment, with specific celestial coordinates and faint, nearly erased carvings that, in the right light, could be seen. Some of them matched religious symbols from West Africa, others looked like Old Norse runes, and still others defied classification altogether. Dr. Harlow asked the locals for permission to open the building, but they refused. He tried to buy his way in, but no one touched the door. Finally, he came back one night with tools and forced the seal open himself. He didn't come out until morning, and when he did, he was silent. His hair whitened, he had aged noticeably, and he never mentioned what he saw. He left academia, left his notes, and spent the remainder of his days in a Vermont sanitarium. The building was resealed, this time with concrete, but rumors persisted, including one about a drifter in the 1960s, a veteran with bright blue eyes, who camped near the property and was discovered days later naked, screaming in Latin, and another about a girl with pale eyes who was born in a nearby town and was blind in one. It is not the place that is cursed, but the eye that sees it, according to something that was found scrolled in the margins of a journal. See something behind the stone. It's unclear what ties them all together. Each victim had the same uncanny feature: eyes the color of a storm-lit sea, eyes that attracted the attention of something ancient and invisible. Over time, a theory, not scholarly, but murmured among the superstitious, emerged that the building wasn't a prison, but rather a keyhole, a lock, or a threshold, and that the blue-eyed were marked rather than cursed. Whatever Elias Boone discovered that night, whatever legacy he left behind, it had not ended with his disappearance. It had only just started to awaken. Marked as watchers, marked as vessels, marked as those who even briefly saw too much and were seen in return. In 2022, a content creator online going by the name Nocturnal Studies uploaded a video titled The Vanishing Overseer, Ash Grove Plantation's Final Secret, which quickly accumulated millions of views. The video was part of a series about forgotten places in the American South that combined urban exploration with speculative aerial shots of the overgrown ruins. Open the footage, which shows the main house as a shell that has partially collapsed. Under the weight of time, the fields empty, the trees dense and oppressive. But at the edge, partially hidden by vines that refuse to touch it, stands the stone building, intact, silent, and waiting. Most episodes were greeted with mild curiosity, but this one lingered. The production is atmospheric but respectful until the last 15 minutes, when he decides to stay overnight. Equipped with night vision cameras, thermal sensors, and a motion-activated recorder, the creator sets up camp outside the stone structure, but he does not enter, claiming to feel a physical pressure at the doorway, as though the air itself. The slave quarters in 1856. He presents the known facts, interviews locals, and reads excerpts from Dr. Lucian Harlow's journal entries. "Like I'm not supposed to see what's in there," he murmurs. Resisting his presence is like pushing against something invisible. A single breath is caught at 3:24 a.m., which does not correspond with the man's breathing patterns outside. At 4:17 a.m., the motion recorder picks up a faint sound, a slow, repetitive knocking from inside the stone building. It sounds more like stone against stone than metallic or wooden. In the final shot of the night, just before sunrise, the creator is seen standing close to the building, completely still, his eyes open but unfocused, his lips moving but no sound is recorded. And after 28 seconds, he collapses. 3 hours later, he wakes up with no memory of what happened. It is deeper, ragged, and too close to the microphone, as if something was pressed against the outer wall. The camera glitches, and the audio is filled with a low hum. He concludes by warning viewers not to go to Ash Grove, not to look for what's left inside, and he says he's been having the same dream ever since that night in which Boone is shown walking, barefoot through endless hallways of wet stone, his eyes milky, his hands covered in moss, and he moves not like a man but rather like a marionette being led by a hand that doesn't sleep. After the video went viral, other people attempted to locate the building, and some were successful, but most reported technical issues, dead batteries, distorted footage, and even broken lenses. The last shot of the Nocturnal Studies video is a still frame, an old photograph discovered in a local archive, showing a group of enslaved workers lined up before the stone quarters. At the far end, a tall figure stands apart, his face obscured by shadow. One claimed to have recorded whispers that repeated their own names, while another said she heard her mother's voice calling from inside the stone building. Her mother had died 10 years earlier, but none dared open the door. Where his eyes should be, however, a faint glint of pale blue appears when filters are applied, and behind the group, barely visible in the shadows of the doorway, stands another figure, thin, watching, impossible to identify. The stone building is still unopened and undisturbed to this day, but on some nights when the fog rolls thick and the air becomes still, people who pass by swear they hear breathing from inside, and people with blue eyes never return the name.